I have over 2,100 miles on my 2022 V85TT, and I thought it was time to share my ownership experience with you. And spoiler alert for you, it's my worst ownership experience of any bike I've ever owned. So as I said, I'm sharing with you my ownership experience. This is not a technical review of the bike. There are plenty of places to get that, but I thought what would be valuable would be to share my overall experience purchasing and owning this bike. But before I get into the negatives, because my experience has not been very good, let me share my positives with you. I really do like the bike. Just to give you a little history of my riding, earlier in my adult life I had a lot of sport bikes, and then I switched to sport tours. I've had a Concourse 14, I've had an FJR 1300, I've had a VFR 800, and then in 2016 I started to switch over to adventure bikes, and I've had an 02 F650 GS Dakar, I have had an 18 Africa Twin, I had a 21 KTM 890 Adventure, and most recently I have sold the KTM and I've been without a larger bike for a while, and I had bought a Kawasaki KLX 300 Dual Sport, which I still have. Basically I got tired of picking up my big bikes off-road on some of the more technical sections, and I wanted a small bike for that, which is what the KLX 300 is for me. And I've been in the market for a mid-sized to large adventure bike that's capable of long hauls, but that is also capable of doing gravel roads and light adventure riding. And so basically I had narrowed it down to a GS, an Africa Twin set up basically for touring. And then I started looking at this Moto Guzzi, and I thought, wow, this Moto Guzzi's got great specs, and the price point is great, and it's not a first-gen bike, so chances are that it would not have any significant problems, and people love them. They're supposed to be easy to maintain, and they ride them far and hard. I was also intrigued by the shaft drive. And I've got to say, this bike delivers on a lot of that. It's got what I need. It's got cruise. You know, I love the shaft drive so far, and the horizontally mounted V-twin. I love the way that feels and the character it gives to the bike, and the way it delivers torque. Overall, it's just been a great bike in terms of how it rides. But then we get to my ownership experience, and that's where I want to start out with a caveat that says I recognize that my experience seems to be an anomaly. I'm an outlier. Most people have largely trouble-free experiences with this bike. Not the case with me. I've had some significant problems, starting with my purchase experience at the dealership, and I've also had some significant factory-related mechanical issues. So I'm going to start at the beginning with my purchase experience. I called the dealership when I was exploring this bike and asked about this particular bike because I liked the Centenario paint scheme. And I asked if the bike had heated grips, and they said it does. So I went down to buy the bike, and it didn't have heated grips. The salesman assured me that based on their ordering system, that the heated grips were at the warehouse, they could order them, and they would have them on the bike for me to pick up within a week. So I went ahead and continued the transaction, bought the bike, and left the bike there for them to install the grips on. A week later, there were still no heated grips. It's now 2.5 months later, and there are still no heated grips. I don't really blame the dealership for this. They owned their mistake. It was an honest mistake, I believe. The sales manager immediately made sure that I had heated grips tossed into the sale for free, including installation. And I believe that they saw what they saw in the Moto Guzzi inventory and ordering system. I believe that system is extremely broken based on my interactions since then with the dealer and with Moto Guzzi's customer care. It seems like Moto Guzzi has no way whatsoever to track their products. They don't know where anything is, and they don't know when it's going to get to its destination. So I'm irritated about that, because for me, having heated grips was a requirement for the bike, and now we're on the front edge of winter. It's almost Thanksgiving, and I still don't have my heated grips. And I love riding in the winter, but I also need heated grips. So that was one problem. Second problem was the crash bars that I ordered along with the bike purchase still aren't in. They did tell me that that might be a while, but the reality is they're still not in. And then there were some dealer setup issues. My lock cylinders on my luggage were installed sideways so that they wouldn't lock properly onto the bike. So I realized that the night before I was leaving on my 1,000-mile trip, and I was scrambling, working with the dealership to try to figure out how they're supposed to be installed, and then I installed them, or I uninstalled them and reinstalled them myself. But, you know, as you can imagine, that's stressful and a hassle and not something I should have had to do. My center stand that I also purchased with the bike, they had that in stock actually, and they installed it on my bike for me. The moment I got that home and put it up on the center stand and then took it off the center stand for the first time, the springs flew off of it along with the bracket plates that the springs connect to. And those center stands with those springs are a pain in the butt to install. I've had to do it on other bikes, which is why I paid the dealership to install it for me. Apparently they didn't make sure that the springs were fully seated in the grooves in the stand when they installed it. So, you know, another issue. But I will say, mistakes happened. The dealership owned all of those mistakes, apologized for those mistakes, which these days doesn't always happen. And so I'm good with the dealer on that, you know? I mean, stuff happens. But in addition to the issue of the grips, what I'm really frustrated about on this bike have been some mechanical issues. So I had just gotten the bike home from the dealership. I was riding around trying to rack up some miles so I could get to my threshold for my first service, which is 900 miles. I was about 90 minutes from home. I had a little over 300 miles on the bike, and everything just went into limp mode, and I coasted to the side of the road, again, 90 minutes away from home, in the middle of nowhere, in the heat, and kind of a dangerous situation, really. Fortunately, I had a cell signal, and fortunately also, I had not disconnected my trailer from my truck when I brought the bike home. My wife was able to get in the truck, bring the trailer to me, and I was able to load the bike up, take it home. But again, then I had to drive the bike back to the dealership, which, by the way, is 3 hours away from my house, and get them to look at it. And it turns out the entire ECU, which is the bike's computer, the whole ECU died completely. They had to fully replace the ECU. So now I'm not trusting the bike. And you know, why did the ECU die? That's a pretty rare thing. Did I have a power surge, or, you know, makes you wonder, right? Anyway, the dealer was good about it. They got permission from Moto Guzzi to cannibalize another bike that they were assembling and use the ECU from that bike. And they got me up and running the same day, so that at least I didn't have to leave the bike there. And I was able to bring the bike back 3 hours back to my house and keep riding. So fast forwarding, after I had taken the bike back to the dealership for the first service, I went on a 1,000-mile ride with a buddy, and it was a great trip. We went from my house in South Carolina up into North Carolina, up into Virginia, and we rode the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Rattler, the Back of the Dragon. It was a phenomenal trip. I got home from that trip and I noticed that my rear rim was coated with 1 to 2 millimeters of oily sludge. And it wasn't just the rim, it was the spokes too, but it was especially notable on the right side of the rim. And it looked like the oil was spinning out from the hub somewhere. And again, this is a shaft drive with a rear differential. I got on the forums, and it seemed to me that the most likely explanation was that the factory had probably overfilled that rear differential, and once it heats up, that oil needed to go somewhere when it expanded, and so it either had leaked out of the seal or the vent, which is on the top of that differential. And the shop confirmed that when I took it back. They said, yeah, the factory had overfilled it. The shop drained 180 milliliters out. They should have only been able to drain 160 milliliters out. And that doesn't count whatever leaked out while I was riding. So it was definitely overfilled. And that was the explanation. The shop said that it had leaked out the vent, not the seal, and they apparently took the vent out, cleaned it, put it back in, and they said everything's good. And I'm riding it again now, and it seems to be so far. I don't see any oil spinning out anymore. But very frustrating, you know. Within the first 2,000 miles of riding on this bike, I've had two major mechanical issues that were factory issues. And so basically, I have a bike that I don't trust, and it's supposed to be my long-haul cross-country bike. But, you know, 2,000 miles, and I've already had two major issues that required dealer attention. I'm not thrilled about that. Again, I believe I'm an outlier with this. Most people don't have these kinds of issues with the bike, and they ride 20, 30,000 miles completely trouble-free. Apparently, I got the Friday afternoon special. But again, I'm sharing with you my ownership experience, not necessarily what to expect should you buy this same bike. So take it for what it's worth. I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please like it and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you out on the road.